Drop it. It's a power panel. Okay. Michael Short, Cenk Uygur, Sarah Jones is here, everybody. Okay. So, and Anna Kasparian's here. Okay. So, quick intro of Sarah, because you know the rest. Tony and Obie award-winning playwright and performer, not a big deal. UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, not a big deal. Known for her multi-character, one-person shows, including Bridge and Tunnel, originally produced by Oscar winner Meryl Streep, not a big deal. Critically acclaimed in every instance, not a big deal. Multiple shows at the White House.
The old White House.
Yeah, that's very important.
Very important.
Yes.
Well, nobody does shows at this White House.
No, there are no. This White House is the show.
Right. Is the Fox and Friends is the only show that's at the White House. Cenk trivia. The Obie goes to.
Okay, so no, we ran out of time because I was going to ask Sarah before the show. Man, this sounds really impressive. But what's an Obie?
I knew it. It's Star Wars related. No, it's not.
It's very easy if you think about it. O-B, theater.
Nope, still don't get it.
We're going to end up with like a Tampax show. Top of the power.
I didn't say method, I said theater.
No, it's off Broadway, but and the show I'm doing now here in LA is the show I premiered it off Broadway. It's called Sell by Date, and it's at the Geffen in LA right now.
Yeah. But it's a play on words. It's sell by date.
Right.
Okay, so. We talked about it in a post game. Anna and I did. Anna went and loved it. My wife went and loved it. So I'm looking forward to
You're
going.
next, buddy.
That's right. Yeah. Michael, you want to be my date?
Sure, I'd love to be your date.
That's exactly in keeping
You're my
with
sell-by date.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can end right there.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're done, everybody.
Have a good week.
All right, I need people to admit that they look forward to Fridays because they look forward to me saying drop it.
And that's what everyone looks forward to. I mean, the rest of the week is really irrelevant.
Right.
TGIDI.
Fear not. Friday has arrived. We have dropped it, and we can proceed forward.
Yes.
So, Sarah, great to have you here.
Thank you.
And
good to be here.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of everybody here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for keeping the sanity alive.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know someone is a true fan of the Young Turks when they know the resume of Michael Short. So
Yeah, that was weird.
yeah,
I didn't mean to freak
Either
you
with
out.
NSA or she's a young person.
So you know where he went to high school. This is off air before we got started. But you were in good company, though. One other person that I've talked to that was like a deep, like knew the resume of Michael Short inside and out was Mark Hamill.
There you go.
So also related to
the
Obie.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's full circle.
We're all the way
bringing
back.
Star Wars all the way through. J.J. Abrams is probably gonna pop through the door any second.
You never know. All right, we got a big show. So Anna, let's do it. Let's kick it off.
All right. A federal court has ruled against an Obama-era regulation that would essentially keep a close eye on financial analysts and ensure that they sell products that keep the best interest of the consumers in mind. Now, these are non-fiduciaries, essentially individuals who don't have any particular credentials to be selling you these products, but they are salespeople who have titles such as financial analyst, financial advisor, financial consultant, financial planner, investment consultant, and they previously, prior to these Obama-era regulations, had no obligation, no legal obligation to sell you products with your best interests in mind. In fact, oftentimes they would sell retirement products to consumers that would not help them, but would give them commission and also give them other financial incentives to sell those products. Now, in 2016, Obama's administration did implement some regulations to ensure that these individuals worked in your best interest. And yesterday, a federal court decided to rule against those regulations. Now, let me give you those details. In a 2-to-1 ruling, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said the fiduciary rule requiring financial investment advisors to act in the best interest of their clients bears the hallmarks of, quote, unreasonableness and constitutes an arbitrary and capricious exercise of administrative power.
So I just want to pause there, Anna, because I think that's so important. And I think that goes to the heart of not just this case or this issue, but it goes to the heart of the problem in our government. So it was 2 judges appointed by Republicans, and hence the corrupting of the judiciary. It's not that Republicans can't appoint judges, of course they can. But what they're doing is they're selecting judges that are only pro-corporate, based on their track record of being pro-corporate. In fact, Neil Gorsuch got the Supreme Court nomination because he was the only judge in the country that ruled that a corporation has the right to order one of their workers to freeze to death and then fire him if he disregards that order. That's an amazing ruling. Every other judge that looked at that case said no, but that was Gorsuch's way of saying, I will do anything for multinational corporations, and that got him the Supreme Court seat. So we have pre-selected these judges to make insane rulings like this. So what they ruled was, it is unreasonable to expect that a financial advisor would have your best interests in mind. The reasonable position would be for them to rob you blind. And so like for them to care about you, their customer or their client, and for the government to protect the citizens is totally unreasonable. And that is the corporate position. It's unreasonable for us to sacrifice even a penny of our profits to look out for our customers or clients.
Right. So let's quickly hear from the judges that ruled against the regulations. One of those judges was Judge Edith Jones, who was nominated by Ronald Reagan. And here's what Judge Jones had to say. Only the Department of Labor's semantically created world, in their semantically created world, do salespeople and insurance brokers have authority or responsibility to render investment advice. The Department of Labor interpretation in some attempts to rewrite the law that is the sole source of its authority. This it cannot do. I don't even understand that attempt at logic, because there was no logic there. These are people who previously, prior to these regulations, did not have to disclose conflicts of interest when selling certain retirement products and pushing for certain investments, which, by the way, in a lot of cases, these investments would work against their client. It would actually decrease the amount of money that they would have in the long run for their retirement. But they didn't have to disclose the conflicts of interest. They didn't have to disclose the incentives that they were given to sell those terrible products to these consumers, right? And also, they would charge fees. And the regulation essentially took care of or prevented them from charging certain fees that, again, in the long run would amount to a considerable amount, that you wouldn't be able to retire with as much as you could had you known, what was at play behind the scenes. So it was providing oversight, but more importantly, it was providing information to the consumer so you knew what conflicts of interest were at play and the types of fees you were being charged. So this is crazy.
It's insane. I keep thinking, the whole point of government is to protect people from the duplicity. This isn't just duplicitous, this is criminal, right? Like this is, it's the potential to sort of grift. We're like saying grifting
But even
is
if it's just duplicitous.
Right, even if it were
it's
just
most
duplicitous.
mild.
Right,
yeah.
right. And I grew up, my parents are both doctors. If there weren't if a doctor could just be like, hey, I'm just gonna maybe give you something that might kill you, and not tell you that if it's gonna make a lot of profit with a pharmaceutical company, although that's kind of happening. But anyway, that's where we are.
Well, we used to have a lot of laws protecting consumers, like a lemon law, for example. A car salesman couldn't sell you a car that he knew didn't function. So this is the car, right? But you could lose your whole savings, and corporate judges view it wholly unreasonable to expect that they tell you the truth about it. Like, so one of the things that they do that Anna was referring to is excessive trading. So when they do excessive trading, they take commission on each trade. As an example, it's one of the many things that could be done. And every time you're losing that money and they're gaining that money. So they've rigged that system so that at the end of the day, thank you very much for investing with us. We now have your money and you don't. Not the whole principle, obviously, but it's a way of milking you for their profit without telling you. And if we could have a lemon law about cars, you could certainly have it about your retirement and your accounts and your entire savings accounts.
Well, think about who they prey on. They prey on retarees, like you were just saying.
That's absolutely right.
It's the people that are most vulnerable, most, in some cases, most gullible because they're not as comfortable with these things, and I'm generalizing, but that's true. One thing to point out, Anna, before you go on, is that this is the Fifth Circuit. It's a 2-to-1 decision. The Fifth Circuit earlier this week gave another 2-to-1 decision in favor of the state of Texas against sanctuary cities. Both of these, so you're not in the 9th District anymore. You're not in this favorable court, but these are both 2-to-1 decisions. In the sanctuary cities case in Texas, they are going to appeal for an en banc hearing, which is all 9 members, or all, I guess, 7 members, is it? I'm not 7 or 9 members of an appeals court. And they're probably going to want to do that in this case as well, because this is what you have with these circuit appeal courts. When they know they can get a good decision, they get a smaller number. They go to a 2-to-1.
So 2 things that I want to point out. One in regard to what Cenk mentioned. So the constant trading that you were referring to, Cenk, is something that's actually pushed toward consumers. So they're referred to as active management or active funds or annuities. And the whole point is so they do constant trading. And again, that's when the individuals doing the trading on your behalf make money, but it doesn't necessarily work toward your best interest or in your best interest, because you will likely lose money when there's that much activity going on. Now, to your point, Michael, something interesting did happen. Now, even though this court ruled against the regulations, another circuit court also made a decision on this regulation that was completely different. And so this is likely to go to the Supreme Court, which isn't necessarily good news considering we have a conservative Supreme Court currently. Now, another circuit court decision has taken an opposite track, meaning the continuing fight could be headed to the Supreme Court. Now, another piece of info that you should know is that the SEC is trying to draft its own version of regulation in response to this. The SEC said it is writing its own version of a best interest standard for brokers. The SEC's rule would likely try to raise the standard of care that brokers must currently meet for all accounts while preserving their ability to charge sales commission and sell in-house products. So obviously we don't have a version of that regulation at the moment, but we'll see how that turns out.
And full disclosure, Edith Jones, the judge, no relation. No relation.
No.
So, okay.
Yeah. So you didn't have to recuse yourself from the story.
Thank goodness.
See, because we take our ethical responsibility seriously.
Very seriously. That's right.
Okay. And one last thing, those words that she used, Edith Jones used, just really struck me. And again, it goes to the heart of what's wrong with the system. She deemed the attempt to protect consumers as arbitrary and capricious. Like almost a slap in the face saying, how dare you try to stand up for the citizens? No, the corporations rule us all, and they can do anything they like. They can trick you, they can take your money, they can lie to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if the government tries to stand up for you, in the rare cases that it tries to stand up for you, we will deem it arbitrary and capricious. How dare they? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not moving to Canada yet, but I'm just saying, I'm glad you're here.
So the best way to protect yourself is to go to a fiduciary. When you're getting financial advice, make sure you're going to someone who actually does have, by law, has your best interest in mind. Okay, let's move forward. Let's talk about our homie, Scott Pruitt.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
No relation. Definitely no relation. I'm not even Pruitt Jones. There's no relation.
Members of the White House and individuals in the Trump administration are going to extreme lengths to cover up certain meetings that they're having. They're not being very transparent about the meetings they take and the types of topics they discuss. But a recent lawsuit revealed that Scott Pruitt had been meeting with a coal executive who had raised over $1 million for Trump's campaign back in 2016. His name is Steve Chancellor, and he is the CEO of White Stallion Energy.
Wow.
Can't make that up. You can't.
So here's what we know so far. First of all, the Sierra Club really came through with ensuring that we had access to this information. Records obtained by the Sierra Club through a Freedom of Information lawsuit against the EPA show that Stephen Chancellor, CEO of White Stallion Energy, met with Pruitt on May 22nd of 2017 for a courtesy call and introductory meeting, which is fascinating. I feel as though they might have already met, but okay. Now, Chancellor petitioned the EPA back in December of 2016, asking the agency to soften a rule designed to curb pollution that floats across state lines. The EPA has not yet responded to his petition or any of those regarding the update the agency confirmed. Now, keep in mind that Chancellor has been an avid supporter of Trump. He hosted a $10,000 per couple fundraiser with Trump, Mike Pence, and Rudy Giuliani back in August of 2016. And he said that he had raised north of $1 million. He later attended Trump's inauguration, where he was spotted shaking hands with Pence. In fact, we have that video for you just to show you what that scene was like. So these are all buddies. These are all people who very clearly want to deregulate the energy or the coal industry as much as possible. And it's something that the Trump administration and the EPA specifically seems willing to do.
He looks like he's from Vegas.
He does look like he's
going to do a magic trick at any. This is the magic trick.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Bilk America out of its like environmental safety.
Right.
For money.
While your democracy's gone.
Yeah.
And another rule that we find out through this story is that conservatives must name things with either the word white or the word black in it. And his previous company was Black Beauty Coal.
Right, both Black Beauty, a black stallion,
That's right,
and he calls this a white stallion. So he likes children's books.
There's a theme.
Okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. Okay, so there's a couple of angles to this story. One is the secretive nature of the meetings. So if you were doing nothing wrong, there's no reason why you wouldn't tell people who you're meeting with, including business interests. So if I was running the EPA, and imagine that for a moment, would I meet with business people? No, I would shun them. No, of course I would. I'd meet with environmental groups, I'd meet with business groups, I'd meet with citizens, and I'd try to have a well-balanced policy that takes all that into account. And I wouldn't hide it, because that'd be a normal thing to do. So why is Pruitt hiding it? It's not like we don't know that Pruitt is meeting with business interests. What he doesn't want you to know is the specific business interests he's meeting with that have given specific donations to Donald Trump and other Republicans, because it's embarrassing, because it shows you the actual game that's being played. So now this guy has given a lot before. He also had raised over $310,000 for George H.W. Bush, so going all the way back there. Raised more than $1 million for Mitt Romney, and the list goes on. Now, he doesn't raise money for those guys because he thinks coal is really good for your health, and these guys would be pro-health, and he just cares so much about America and charity that he's doing this. No, he comes in with a very, very specific request. My industries pollute the rivers and the waters and the air, and I would like that pollution to be able to float into your state. Okay, so I want to deregulate this specific thing so I can make more money. And I believe that the money that I spend on politicians is gonna get me a great return on investment. So I give you $1 million, you deregulate, thereby I don't have to do any of the safety stuff that saves me millions upon millions of dollars. The reason that business interests give money to people like Scott Pruitt and Donald Trump is because they make more money by capturing the government. This is how our democracy dies.
Yes, I just have to say, the Scott Pruitt, just his name, I mean, it basically becomes the Environmental Pollution Agency. It's EPA doesn't stand for protection, right? It doesn't, I mean, this is a person who sued the EPA himself repeatedly to make sure none of the exactly what you're talking about, Jen. So I just sort of feel like the fact that he's, in this position, I'm not surprised at any Vegas types that are, kind of coming in for the spoils, because they're all available now.
In fact, it's funny you should mention that. One of the other folks that Pruitt is meeting with is investors connected with Republican mega donor Sheldon Adelson, who runs a lot of Vegas casinos, is a billionaire.
And puts a ton of money into the Republican pockets, and he also is the person that everyone who's running for office on a federal level, and as a Republican, wants to get in good favor with. Pruitt is supposed to be setting himself up to run for the Senate. I mean, this is all taking place in Indiana. He's from Oklahoma. James Inhofe is, ancient and probably will not run again in 2020. Maybe that's the seat he wants. But a Republican needs to raise $7 in Oklahoma to win a Senate race.
Yeah, but Adelson gives sometimes $25 million at a time because we just have an open auction right now for seats. So if you're in good with Adelson or even Stephen Chancellor, who gives him, can raise $1 million at a time, winning a Senate seat in Oklahoma gets a lot easier. Although I do like what Michael's saying about Inhofe retiring. From your mouth to God's ears.
Well, Inhofe retiring to make way for Scott Pruitt.
Well, you never know. In Oklahoma, we've had a lot of Democrats win special elections.
That's true. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that if Scott Pruitt is so well financed in Oklahoma, Republicans tend to do well there, better there than any state in the country.
So one other person that he met with that I found amusing is. He met with the group Family Research Council, led by Tony Perkins. Okay, wait, this is the EPA. So, I mean, maybe the education department, although I don't want him anywhere near the education department, but I don't, like the EPA, why are we meeting with the so-called family values guys who now, because they support Trump, hate family values? Okay, but like, wait, how does hating gay people have anything to do with environmental protection? I don't, and that goes to Michael's point. He's not actually running the EPA. He's running for Senate. He's trying to find all these different donors and allies for his own purposes.
And listen, I have to add something else to that very quickly. Scott Pruitt, it has been said now, there were rumors that he was going to become Attorney General should Jeff Sessions step down. It has now been widely reported that those rumors began with Scott Pruitt. So he's been floating his name as the heir to the Sessions Attorney General seat should Trump, as some are predicting, fire Jeff Sessions.
So apparently John Kelly had to call him and tell him, cool it, we got it, you're the one, you're in it for yourself, which given John Kelly's boss is a hilarious criticism of someone.
He should know.
Yeah. And I like the euphemism they're using for these meetings with enormous donors. It was a courtesy call. Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, if a dude gives you $1 million, you do owe him the courtesy of a call.
Very courteous.
And that's exactly what's wrong with this system.
All right, we got to take a break. Let's do that. And when we come back, I'm going to show you just how fiscal conservatives in the Trump administration really are.
Oh boy, this will be good.
All right, back on the Young Turks. I love these tweets that were sent in. Adam wrote this, I think before I said it, so we're thinking along similar lines. Sorry about that, Adam. Anyway, Blackwater, white fish, and now white stallion. Corruption in the Trump administration is literally right there in black and white.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Well done,
And a better
well
ending than mine. Danger Carlos Dangerous says, it appears the best way to ensure that you're not getting screwed over by excessive stock market trading is to be too poor to own stock. So that's one way to go. Okay.
The silver lining playbook.
That's right. Lucifer says, damn right, I wait all week for drop it. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Can I make a quick comment about the previous tweet, saving money for retirement and everything? But just think about that for a second. Like the right wing wants to do away or privatize Social Security, which is the only form of retirement that isn't associated to risk and predatory behavior outside of our politicians, right? And it's terrifying. So you have these Americans who are responsible, they're scraping by, they're putting money aside for retirement, then you have these freaking predators taking advantage of them and charging them fees and not disclosing their conflicts of interest. And it sucks that we have judges that would rule against regulation to protect us.
That's a great point, Anna. It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
If they privatize Social Security, now they have no responsibility to make sure that you actually save money.
Right.
In fact, they are empowered by the judges to rip you off any way they like. So I like me getting excited that Lucifer looks forward to Fridays on the Young Turks. Anyway, Sexy Speed Racer says, love Danny Kasparian's eye roll when Cenk almost forgot to introduce her.
I roll my eyes at you a lot.
Yes, indeed, that's right. And then one last one, Freedom Tide connects all the Star Wars analogies together. A comment on yesterday's story about conservatives' brains being different. Fear is the path of the conservatives. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to Republicans manipulating everybody's fear. The cycle just repeats continuously. So a little bit of Yoda in there, and unfortunately, a very accurate portrayal of what's going on with conservatives today in America. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right. Turns out that members of Trump's administration are spending a considerable amount of money on nonsense. Let me give you a few examples. First, we could never forget the reason why Ryan Zinke, who was the Secretary of the Interior, why he decided to resign. He had spent a lot of money on flights about, I'm sorry, Tom Price. I'm mixing up all these clowns.
What do we? I just grabbed my phone. Grabbed my phone to look. Wait a second, Zinke resigned.
I had Zinke on the mind because he's also in this story, but I meant Tom Price. So
you're doing Monday's story.
It's all in there.
He's being fired next week.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Just wait for which firing why.
All right, let me backtrack. Sorry about that. I don't want to confuse anyone. Okay. Several members of Trump's administration have been caught spending a considerable amount of taxpayer money on nonsense. We can't forget Tom Price, who had to resign after he was found to spend $900,000 on airfare in a mere 7 months. But now we have a bunch of other examples that I think the American people should know about. So for instance, Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke spent $139,000 on 3 sets of doors. Oh those must have been the best doors made of the best solid wood imaginable.
Well, you know what? Maybe those are the same kind of doors that Trump wants to test out for his wall. Because you remember, he said, I mean, we're going to have a big, beautiful door on the wall. So Zinke's Secretary of the Interior. The door faces the interior.
It's also, he's the Secretary of the Interior Design.
Okay, that's what was left out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm obsessed with interior design. There's no way those doors cost like a total of $139,000. There's no way, unless those were the largest doors made of the most luxurious wood. And maybe they had to do construction in the doorway in order to accommodate the doors. It just doesn't make sense. $139,000.
There were 6 of them. Let's be fair.
6 doors.
Okay, 3 sets of doors.
3 sets of doors.
Okay, but no, there's a real reason, by the way. So it's not that he wanted his doors to smell of rich mahogany. Okay, it's that both him and Pruitt, who got a phone booth that I think you're going to tell us about it a little bit later, want secrecy. so they want to make sure that no sound gets out. Gee, I wonder why. Because when you're doing above the board deals, you care a lot about sound leaking from your office, right? No, when you got the donors in and you're saying, thank you for the legalized bribe, now what can I do for you? And cutting shady deals, then you need doors with tremendous soundproofing to make sure nobody hears.
But still, even with the soundproofing, not buying it. Just not buying it.
Of course not.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I'll give you some other examples, and Cenk quickly mentioned this. Scott Pruitt spent $43,000 on a phone booth. I don't know what that means either. So, like, did he want to go retro and
maybe it's for his magic act. I think it's for his magic act. I think there's an assistant in there who cuts in half. It's probably an exotic animal as well.
I got a different theory. I like all our theories. It's cosplay. He dresses up as Superman, but doesn't want to let people know. And every afternoon he's like,
I can't imagine it was Superman. He's got to be the evil doer.
Yeah. Maybe it's for Lex Luthor dress up day. But again, in all seriousness, the phone booth makes no sense in the year 2017 unless you need a place to make phone calls where no one can hear you. And Scott Pruitt is also the guy that is in the news today because he won't reveal his meetings with people that come into his office because he's worried you might find out the deals that he's making.
Right. Look, and by the way, of course, you look at these numbers and they seem ridiculous, but when you look at the grand scheme of things and how much money our government spends in taxpayer dollars, it doesn't seem like it's much, it's just a drop in the bucket. But the point is, these are the same people who will turn around and talk about cutting entitlement spending, right? By the way, they're entitlements because we've paid into them with our taxpayer money. They talk about cutting those entitlements, and then the stereotype on the right wing is that people don't want to work, people are wasteful with their money, they're irresponsible. I mean, you don't think $43,000 for a phone booth is irresponsible, or $139,000 on 3 sets of doors? And then this is my personal favorite. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, spent $31,000 to order a new dining room set. So the backstory to this is even more fascinating. So the HUD office had a dining room set that was old, admittedly, it was from 1988. And
wow.
Well, I mean,
I thought you were going to say like it was from Andrew Jackson era. Okay, 88. I was actually I made it to college in 88.
In 88, Jack Kemp was the Secretary of HUD, former NFL player.
Yeah.
But you get what I mean. I mean, it was scuffed up. I saw photos of it, and I was like, okay, I get it. They do need a new dining room set. I get it. But okay, so $31,000 for a dining room set seems outrageously expensive. I don't buy it. I don't think dining room sets cost that much. I don't care how nice and luxurious it is. But when Ben Carson was asked about this, he was like, I had no part of this. I didn't even know about it. I didn't play any role in picking out,
How did that get there?
And then emails revealed that he and his wife chose this dining room set.
Like personally chose it.
Yes.
And that makes
But to be fair to Ben Carson, he might have been asleep when he wrote that.
He might have been asleep.
You're right.
Just like under the table itself. He might have been just curled up right under that table. Going,
That old ratty table.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, that's the best and the worst one because it's the best because, I mean, when you compare it to $139,000 for doors, this is going to be used every day. They didn't need a new dining set. Of course, $31,000 is absurd. It's government money, but it's also the worst because he just lied.
Right.
He just plain lied about what happened.
So we're going to get to Mnuchin in a second, but I can't get off of Ben Carson for a second, okay? Because, so look, I actually think the $31,000 dining room table, I don't know, man. Look, if my wife said, hey, would you like to buy a $31,000 dining room table? First of all, with whose money? Right? Second of all, are you insane? Are you insane? Okay, but I get it. We're a family, and it's a government office, and presumably it's larger. And I'm not freaked out by the $31,000. They waste so much money. There's probably a $31,000 hammer somewhere in the Pentagon, right? And I think that you're right that the lying about it is the bigger problem. But a lot of times the press like focuses on this stuff, but $1.5 trillion in tax cuts for the rich is so much larger. Do you know how many dining room sets they're gonna buy with that?
The media is the rich. The media is not like us, okay? They're not like us where we're making, not with anchors on CNN and MSNBC and whatever. They're making a lot more money. They
but that's
are the
only
rich.
that's only a handful of. There are only a handful of people in the media making a ton of money. They're writers and watchdogs, and you know when you hear Donald Trump talk about the media. And he says, look at these elite, rich, wealthy. Everyone in the media room listening to him was looking like, really? You know?
No, but you're right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that distinction because in print, there was definitely great reporting about those tax cuts and how unpopular they were, how disastrous they were, how it was a huge handout to the wealthy. But you don't see the same type of reporting on television. And think about what these television or who these television networks are owned by, which corporations they're owned by. They don't want that kind of reporting.
So that's why they report on the minor league corruption, and it's both good to point it out and also a bit of a distraction. And look, I think we're logically consistent. We point out both, and we point out the donations to the politicians being far worse because in fact here, let me give you a number that's amazing. So, and talk about the scale of the real problem. In a 5-year period between 2010 and 2015, the top 200 corporations that spent money in trying to influence politicians spent $5.8 billion. Now that's a lot of money. It's the top 200 corporations. It doesn't even count all of them, right? 5.8 billion. You know how much they got back from the government in subsidies, handouts, etc.? $4.4 trillion.
God, it burns.
So that's the legalized bribery.
Right.
And so us looking at a couple of doors and dining room tables, it's important to point out, but it's not nearly as important as the $4.4 trillion that walked out the building because we allow bribery in this country.
I know, but just juxtapose a dining room set to food stamps for the needy. To make sure that kids have food on their plate.
They'll cut everything, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry, guys. That's such a good point because in the same week, Ben Carson put out a statement saying, hey, look, people got to pick themselves up by the bootstraps because he runs housing and urban development. He's supposed to help poor people with housing, right? And he's like, no. He was worried that they would get, they had to be weaned off the government dole.
Right.
On the government dole, he just bought a $31,000 dining room table. And the other reason why, to be fair to the media that focuses on it, by the way, including us, we're doing this story, is that it's easier to relate to a dining room table than it is a $4.4 trillion in crony capitalism.
Yeah. But the pull yourself up, I mean, this personal responsibility narrative is such a joke. These people are children with monopoly money. We taxpayers, create these fat coffers for them that they just go and, it's
and
stunning.
mandating the bootstrapper as opposed to teaching how to bootstrap are two different things.
Very true.
And when you hear somebody like Ben Carson say it, it's kind of hysterical in his position now, right?
Where he's totally unqualified.
So now we go to Mnuchin.
Yes.
And so he spent $995,000 on 8 military jet trips since taking office in last February. So they crunched the numbers on that, and it turns out he spent $2,507 per day since he's taken office on just airfare.
Right, and these are not commercial flights. These are obviously private jets. And the reason, so he was questioned about that. And he said the reason why he refuses to fly commercial is because he needs privacy in order to discuss national security matters with Trump. This is the Treasury Secretary.
There's that.
And he's discussing national security. By the way, Trump doesn't want to be briefed on national security.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
So no one's buying that for a second.
So show us the phone logs of how many times he's spoken to Trump from an airplane, not from a military airplane. I mean, because I can't imagine it's maybe ever.
It's not before 11 a.m.
Right? And And if there's an emergency, you don't. I mean, it was in something we wrote or I read earlier that you don't call. It's like, oh, get me Mnuchin. The country's, about to explode, right?
Well, I love that potential conversation. We've got trouble in Waziristan. Get Mnuchin on the line. Like, why would you call the Treasury Secretary about a national security issue like that? And what are the chances that Donald Trump knows where Waziristan is?
Right, that's true. This a good time before we go to talk. Then we're talking about finances. Louise Slaughter, the eldest member of the House of Representatives, died today. A congresswoman from upstate New York, Rochester area, born in Kentucky, so she was from Rochester, and she had a thick Southern accent. She wrote the Stock Act, and the Stock Act is the act that made it illegal for members of Congress to trade on information that they got to protect consumers from not having that unfair advantage. So it all plays into this. There are people in Washington working to stop this stuff. They just don't have voices that are loud. And she was the first woman to run the Rules Committee, one of the most the most powerful committee in Congress. A pretty cool lady.
And the Trump administration, in a previous story we did, is gutting the Stock Act. So, of course. And last thing on this, I'm amazed by their lack of conscience. I guess I shouldn't be there. It's Mnuchin, he's the one that took advantage of the economic crash to profit off the foreclosures. And he worked at Goldman Sachs for a long period of time. It said he's the globalist financial elite guy that Trump was talking about during the campaign. I mean, they're like, him and his wife are like comic book villains, down to their outfits, etc. But it doesn't occur to him that, hey, charging the taxpayer $995,000 for 8 trips, eight trips
also,
on a
he's the
plane.
Secretary of Treasury, of one person who should know when you're wasting money and being stupid with money, right? The one American, right?
Right. And they do it anyway because they have no regard for you.
Yeah.
All right, let's take one more break, and when we come back, more stories for you, including a candidate who would like to arm the homeless. Who is he, and what is his reasoning?
Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/TYT interviews, and we've done some amazing ones recently. So now, of course, the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all?
And we're in a time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history in 2017. Right.
Hey, Cenk, what's up?
Aaron, I'm reading some of the comments on a YouTube video I did. What's a cuck? Go.
I just shot a clip. It's time sensitive and it needs to be edited right now.
Did anybody call for an editor?
Need this in an hour.
But you're an editor too.
Love you.
You have in common with your daughter?
I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that.
He said I had small hands. They're not small, are they? I never heard that one before.
All right, back on the Young Turks. A couple tweets. Skepticus Rex says, for $31,000, that dining room table better be able to seat all of Rhode Island. Kelly Kerr says, who was it that said with the tax cuts, families would save $1,000 so they could buy a new car or redo their kitchen? They obviously have no idea what things cost. You should just ask Carson, right?
Or you just got a huge tax cut.
Ishka Bibble says, Carson says that being poor is a choice. Yeah, well, it's when you come out of the womb, I mean, it's a curious choice that people make.
Yeah.
And I've told this many times, but I think it's important to know. African American average two-parent family for African Americans in this country, net worth of the family is $16,000. Same metrics for a white family is $160,000. Wow. So when you talk about white privilege, you don't know it, but on average, you were born into a family that had 10 times the wealth of an average African American. So that's kind of how white privilege works. It doesn't mean that you're rich. It doesn't mean that everything is wonderful and rainbows and unicorns for you. It just means that it's a different situation. So when they pay a guy like Ben Carson to say being poor is a choice, right, they know it's just a sad joke and a sick joke on all of you guys, including if you're a poor white guy in the middle of West Virginia, Nebraska, or wherever. Right. And Tom Zawacki says the only reason Price got fired is because Trump was mad he was spending more on air travel than him, which is entirely possible. I spend the most on air travel. I have the best planes.
The best. They're huge, my planes.
Yeah, well, now they are. That's true. Yeah. So, Sarah, what's going on lately? What are you up to?
Well, I'm doing this show, Sell by Date, and folks can find out more about where it is and where it's traveling, what I'm up to, following me on the socials. I'm on Twitter at Joan Sarah, and you should know my show kind of has multiple personalities in it, right? I even brought one of them with me. She just is a big fan.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Well, listen, hi there. My name is Lorraine Levine, and Sarah Jones brought me here today. I'm a huge fan because I remember in America where, it was actually government by the people for the people. At least, we at least pretended that was the goal. So anyway, I'm in the show Sell by Date. Come to the Geffen because I won't tell you how old I am, but I won't live forever. So come while we're running.
I'm doing this show with all these different people in it, but they're all fans, and I'm looking forward to sharing it.
And Sarah gets to do Indian accents.
I do.
Which I want to do, but I hear I'm not allowed to anymore.
You must channel your inner. Really, you have to totally believe in that democracy of 1 billion people. See how that feels inside. Then you can do it.
Okay, I gotta know that. I'm gonna come for that alone, let alone everything else. All right, and speaking of appearances, Anna is going to be on in Bernie's Town Hall on Monday. So we're gonna have the show normal time, 6 o'clock Eastern on Monday, but at 7 o'clock Eastern, we're gonna switch over to the Bernie Sanders Town Hall on income inequality, a topic we were just discussing.
There it is.
And Anna will participate in that town hall again. So make sure you're here at tytnetwork.com/live.
Is that in DC again?
Yeah.
So cool.
And then we're gonna have commentary, obviously. We're gonna watch it along with you guys here, then we're gonna have commentary afterwards in the studio in LA. And if you wanna learn more about the town hall, go to tytnetwork.com/inequality. Okay? All right, what's next, Anna?
There is a Senate candidate that I want to inform you about. He is a libertarian and is likely to win the endorsement of the Libertarian Party in his state. His name is Brian Ellison, and he is planning on challenging Democratic incumbent Debbie Stabenow. And he says that homeless people are constantly victims of violent crime, which is true, and it's heartwarming and encouraging to hear that there's someone who wants to do something about this, right? But he thinks that the best solution is to provide them with firearms. Okay.
God, I can't.
As if they were teachers.
Right. All right, so let me give you the details of his proposal. And he's being serious. At first I thought maybe this was a joke, but no, he's being serious. So let's go to graphic 17. He says, frankly, I think the ideal weapon would be a pistol, but due to the licensing requirements in the state, we're going to have a hard enough time getting homeless people shotguns as it is. So he specifically wants to provide them with shotguns because the licensing requirements are a little more laxed when it comes to these shotguns. Now, Ellison said he and his team would aim to pre-qualify homeless people who wanted shotguns and were deemed suitable candidates to own them. So there's the issue of providing the guns, right? But then where do they get the ammunition for these guns? Well, Ellison's always thinking, he did think about this, and he realized that they would provide these individuals with a limited amount of bullets. And if they are caught using those bullets to shoot cans or anything other than someone who is posing a risk or a threat, then they would no longer give them bullets.
Okay, they're gonna get 5 or 6 shell magazines. First, let's note for the record that this guy's a very stable genius. But you're gonna get 5 or 6 shell magazines. And he's like, now, if they run out of them defending themselves, then we'll give them more bullets. Really? They're gonna shoot 5 or 6 people? And then like, my God, okay, this guy, I mean, to be fair, he used he fired twice in one time, so 3 people are dead. Now finally we can give the guy new bullets because he used them well. Right. And he says that he settled on pump action shotguns for practicality purposes. Because how else would a homeless person kill someone if he didn't have a pump action shotgun?
Yeah, so again, it has more to do with the licensing requirements in the state. So if you have a pistol, you have to get it licensed, and in order to get it licensed, you need to have an address. And if you're homeless, you don't have an address. So he's actually thought through some of the details, which is amazing.
He also said he's gonna sort of poll them to see if it's something they want, because he doesn't want to force it on them.
He said that's right. He said they will not be forced to carry shotguns. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
So he's going to go among the homeless and say, you guys want guns?
I can't. I mean, I just want to go back to what Michael said. Like, we're at a place now where, like, of course he cares, and I think that's fantastic. This is total madness. Teachers being armed, it's not a solution. Every statistic shows us that when you put the gun in the person's hands, you increase their risk of death or injury. But I mean, you're basically throwing fuel on the problem.
Exactly.
And let me also bring up another thing. So, these are homeless people. They're unfortunately living on the street. What happens when they're asleep and their weapon is there? Like, who's gonna prevent another person from obtaining that weapon illegally? And I mean, this is such a terrible idea.
Trading their guns for alcohol or drugs or money, selling their gun.
Right.
Without
you think they're going to go through the proper registration to sell the gun?
Right.
Or are they just going to say, this is my private gun show?
The Skid Row loophole.
Yeah.
So one more quote from candidate Ellison. He says, "Are you worried about the police being armed with military weapons? I am. The world we live in is a scary world where the police, who used to dress in short sleeve shirts and carry a revolver, now have long rifles with scopes and bulletproof vests and armored vehicles. And quite frankly, that scares me much more than a homeless person trying to defend themselves with a shotgun." I think you can be scared of both.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to be scared of both.
I'm definitely terrified of both. I'm going with like both.
But just putting more guns into society.
Amazing.
Yeah, so look, I want to be clear about something. I don't even think this Ellison guy has bad intent or is a bad guy overall. Look, he says a lot of things that are interesting. He's worried about over militarizing the cops. He is a libertarian, so he thinks we're doing too much foreign intervention. I looked into him, okay, and he cares about minority civil rights. Those are all wonderful things, but he genuinely believes that the answer is always a gun, right? Is some sort of weapon, and so. Like we care about the homeless intensely, and so we think maybe a home,
just a thought, some food, a home, some healthcare.
And I don't say that just like flippantly. Utah, Salt Lake City, actually built homes for the homeless and found that it was incredibly cost efficient.
Yes.
It solved a lot of their medical problems. It solved a lot of the services that you would normally have to provide, and it was like this counterintuitive idea of like, they're homeless. Why don't we give them homes, right? And it turned out to be genius. Other places are trying homes to cut down on emergency room costs, et cetera, providing some funding for rentals, et cetera. So there's so many different ways to address it, but let's also be realistic, and we've talked about this a lot. A lot of the homeless are mentally ill. They didn't choose to be there, they just have an issue, and but they also have rights, and it's really complicated, and you want to help them, but you want to respect their rights, etc. But I think the very last thing you want to do to help mentally ill homeless people is to give them a weapon, because
I thought of it selfishly, to be honest, like the idea of walking in LA's downtown or in San Francisco with homeless people with shotguns does not sound good to me. I'm keeping it real on that. But you guys made a good point that they're actually more likely to hurt themselves because that's actually what happens when people own guns. Sarah made the point. She's right. 500 people die every single year in America from accidental gunshot wounds. To give you a sense of context, this is amazing. All gun deaths in Japan combined, even if you triple their population to equal ours, is only 39. Wow. Whereas we have 500 deaths every year from just accidents, let alone homicides and suicides, which is over 30,000.
It's amazing.
I learned today that the NRA, when they hold their convention, gun violence goes down around the country every year during the 5 days of the NRA convention every year.
Wow.
I'm researching, isn't it amazing? I'm researching because I'm going to cover it this year and the convention in Dallas. And when I learned that fact, and I was supported by lots of other research.
Correlation does not equal causation, Michael.
I'm so sorry.
And if you say that, they will shoot you or arm a homeless man to do likewise.
Exactly. I was going to say, get some homeless folks on the payroll. And thank you for that point about it's just a health issue, right? Mental health is just a health issue that needs to be destigmatized. Put guns in the hands of folks who actually just need care.
And plus the gun control opponents are saying, no, we have to deal with the mentally ill. This is not how you deal with the mentally ill. Right?
Well, but in America, on a macro scale, we have a mental health problem.
Of course we do.
Because we think that the right answer for everything, including homelessness driven by mental illness, oh, it's okay, I got the solution. Give him a gun. Give him a shotgun while you're at it. And that'll solve it. Because the answer is always further weaponry.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
All right, one more story.
All right. A Democrat has stepped up in Maine to challenge a Republican candidate for a state House seat. Now, the reason why this particular race is catching headlines is because Leslie Gibson, the Republican candidate, recently was criticized for some of the statements he made on Twitter in regard to the survivors of the mass shooting that took place in Parkland, Florida. Now, what he said infuriated one woman so much that she decided to challenge him because she realized that he was running unopposed. Her name is Erin Gilchrist, and there she is. She's the Democratic candidate. And she met the Thursday filing deadline to place her name on the ballot against Leslie Gibson, who until then had been running unopposed. Gibson put himself in the spotlight earlier this month by verbally attacking the two Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school students on Twitter. And the two that we're referring to are Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg. So here's what he had to say about Emma Gonzalez, and it was disgusting. Again, this was on Twitter. He wrote, "There is nothing about this skinhead lesbian that impresses me, and there is nothing that she has to say unless you're frothing at the mouth, Moonbat. Unless you're a frothing at the mouth, Moonbat." Now, I want to share a video. It's a montage of Emma Gonzalez, so you can kind of get a sense of why the right wing hates her so much and why I absolutely love her. Take a look.
What do you think about this idea of arming teachers?
It's stupid.
Why?
First of all, Douglas ran out of paper for like 2 weeks in the school year, and now all of a sudden they have $400 million to pay for teachers to get trained to arm themselves? Really? Really? I want you to know that we will support your two children in the way that we will not. You will not. Do you keep it in a lockbox or do you carry it on your person? If the teacher dies and a student who's a good student is able to get the gun, are they now held responsible to shoot the student who's come into the door?
I think I'm just gonna interrupt you real quick and remind you that the question is actually, do you believe it should be harder to obtain these semi-automatic weapons and modifications to make them fully automatic, such as bump stocks?
I love her. I mean, first of all, Emma for president, but also, can I move to Maine fast enough to vote for Aaron Gilchrist? Like how much, you know what I mean? How much time do I need?
Wait till June.
Okay, I'll wait till June. Right.
I think Aaron actually has a good chance of winning. I'll tell you why. One, Maine has public financing, so anybody's got a shot, which is great. And the private financing of elections. Secondly, the number one problem the local candidates have is no media attention. So the person with more money usually wins because they have a bigger megaphone and the media doesn't cover the local races. So here, in her case, problem solved. Everybody's focusing on that small local race in Maine. So I think Aaron's got a perfectly good shot of winning that race, which is great. How great would it be if a citizen who's 28 years old got motivated to action, and she said she had no interest in politics before, but saw that he was running unopposed, was like, we can't let this stand. And got into the race. I'm telling you, I think she has I can't wait for election night when I tell you, hey, remember that story of the guy who called Emma Gonzalez a skinhead lesbian? Well, that's the former representative from Maine. That would be fantastic. And I want to know something that I just realized as we're doing this story. We try really hard to not say the names of the shooters after the first day or first couple of days of coverage. And I think that we've done a pretty decent job at it, not perfect. And I think the media is now heading in that direction overall, which I'm thrilled about. We've been talking about it for a decade on the show. But for the first time, we have victims' names that are much more recognizable than the shooters' names. So Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg and some of the other students are now really well known, which is amazing. And in fact, what triggered, if you will, this Republican to attack Gonzalez was that Gonzalez's Twitter handle had more followers than the NRA's. And that was the news story that made him a special little snowflake, and he needed a safe space from. So that's why he was like, oh, I can't believe this. Lesbian has more than my beloved NRA. Because conservatives are so obsessed with like Twitter following. Trump and these guys, who's got more on Twitter?
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I had to bring it up because someone made this point on Facebook, and I thought it was such a fabulous point. Following this shooting in Parkland, Florida, there were people on the right that were arguing that one of the issues is that, this kid was bullied. He was tortured by the bullying, and if people were just better toward him, treated him better, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But remember, it's the right wing that moans about snowflakes nonstop. Like, oh, special little snowflakes. Oh, do we have to worry about your feelings? So, I mean, you can't use that argument when it's convenient for you. And this was not an issue of a kid being bullied. This was an issue of someone who had no reason to have any access to a gun, being able to easily and legally purchase one. So,
Anna, that's such a great point. I hadn't thought of that in that way either. Which is their main argument is, no, it's not a gun control issue. Because if we just given the bully a safe space, right? Or the shooter a safe space from bullies, they claim, right? I think that when you shoot 17 people, you're the bully. But in the topsy-turvy conservative world, he was the poor kid. If he just had a safe space, he'd have been okay.
And by the way, the same argument was made when that shooter in Santa Barbara did what he did. And he had made videos about how women wouldn't give him a chance or other female students wouldn't give him a chance. And there were people on the right that empathized with him. So where's your snowflake argument now?
They have selective empathy. They love to trot it out when it's convenient for them.
Yes.
That's exactly right. All right, everybody check out Buy, Sell, Date by Sarah Jones.
Sell by date. It's a tricky.
Sell by date.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, like I said, because of the play on words. All right, and Michael Schur on I-24.
Yeah, I24news.tv. Come find us.
So when we come back, whole new power panel. Simone Boyce is here. Gina Grad is here.
Gina Grad is here.
Yes. And we got some amazing stories for you guys, including some of these people who participated in the National School Walkout receiving corporal punishment. They were beaten by school administrators for participating in the walkout.
Beaten is a very strong word. They were spanked.
They were swatted.
Okay, that's a better word.
Yeah.
Well,
they're trying to avoid one form of violence. They get, it's like, come on.
Yeah, violence. There's one thing I know: violence is the answer.
Always in America.
All right, guys, we'll be right back.
terrorist cops news, we bomb ya. Your sticks and stones can't break through this armor. Cenk Uygur, the recruiter.
All right, back out of here. Turks, drop it again. Another power panel. Okay, Simone Boyce from KTLA 5 Morning News. Look at Gina Grad back on the show.
Oh my
Great
God,
to have you
so
here,
happy
Gina.
to be here. Thanks, guys.
Also on the Adam Carolla podcast, of course, and Brett Ehrlich of Brett Ehrlich fame.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to read 2 quick tweets, and then Brett's got some amazing stories for you guys. Cultural Groucho Marxism says, I'm in favor of giving the homeless guns, but if you give them guns, you got to give them ammo. They also need some place to store it, so give them gun safes. Well, you need some place to put the gun safe, so give them a house. Now let's just skip the first 3 steps for a good plan.
That was great.
That's good.
That was a good.
Thanks for the 240 characters, so we could get that joke in.
I know, right? That was, and he set it all the way up. And Dancing Queen says, great point, Cenk. For the first time, the students' names are more known than the shooter's name. Yes. And members of the day are Adrian Delgado and Sarah Householder. Well, lucky for them. They were members of the day yesterday, too. So it's a double members of the day. TYTnetwork.com/join to become a member, get any part of the show that you might have missed, get all of our shows, get them all ad-free. And I wanted to just point out, Anna was in the first hour. Don't miss her on Monday when we're going to carry Bernie Sanders' town hall on income inequality, and Anna will be part of the program.
Nice.
So check that out at 7 o'clock Eastern, Facebook.com/The Young Turks. It'll also be on YouTube and at TYTnetwork.com/live as well. Okay? All right. Brett, what do you got for us?
That is a lineup and a half. All right. So yesterday there was the national walkout to memorialize those who were victims of the shooting in Parkland and also to protest gun violence. One of the parents of a student in Arkansas who participated in the walkout tweeted this. Her name is Jerusalem Greer. She said, my kid and 2 other students walked out of their rural, very conservative public school for 17 minutes today. They were given 2 punishment options. They chose corporal punishment. This generation is not playing around, #walkout. Corporal punishment is still a thing in schools. It's outlawed in, I think it is 31 states. It's still okay in 19 states per the Washington Post as recently. I think that's a stat from a few years ago, but they're called SWATs. That's the program that he was administered, SWATs, on the thigh with a paddle.
Oh my God.
Here is the description of the policy. According to Greenbrier Public Schools official policy, the school board authorizes the use of corporal punishment to be administered in accordance with this policy by the superintendent or his/her designated staff members who are required to have a state-issued license as a condition of their employment. It's still a thing, corporal punishment.
Do we know how old these students are? They high school? They're high school, right?
High school kids.
The image of a high school student getting slapped, or swatted. It's just mind-boggling to me.
And allowing themselves to get. I wonder what the other option was.
The other option was a 2-day in-school suspension. So he's just like, all right, let's get it over with.
They're hardcore, man.
Yeah, no, the students were, first of all, they're wonderfully brave. He was the first one to walk out. This particular guy, let me give you his name. Wiley A. Greer, right? So Wiley walks out and he said when he stood up to walk out at 10 a.m., there was gasps in the classroom and everybody was looking at him like, what are you doing? Because look, in our bubble, in a big city like LA, a lot of people are liberal. Walking out, if you don't walk out, people look at you kind of funny like, what, you want guns in school? What are you, a weirdo, right? But over there, walking out is a huge sign of courage. And he said he went out and then he sat on the park bench in front of the school and he's like, is anybody gonna join me? And then he said finally, 2 other kids came out and he said they were the 2 smartest kids in the school. That was my favorite part of the story.
I also loved that student said that he was confounded by the fact that his school's administrators would meet a protest for gun violence with more violence. corporal punishment.
Well said.
Yeah.
That's just, and not my words, but his. But I just thought that was very powerful.
Yeah, like Wiley, so great, man. So because he could have taken the in-school suspension. Now, look, if I'm keeping it real, I'd much rather take the SWATs than the 2 days of in-school suspension, which is like solitary confinement. You lose your mind in there. But and I have a high threshold for pain. But okay, of course they shouldn't have corporal punishment. We shouldn't be swatting people with a paddle. And like, luckily there are some rules and regulations, and so there has to be another adult present. Which that was the main thing I was looking for. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on with this paddling? I want to make sure that everybody's safe here. But he said he took the punishment to make a point about the violence, right? It wasn't just that he preferred the swatting. He says, no, corporal punishment shouldn't exist in the schools. And I took it to make the point that Simone referred to.
Well, and don't you think it's so hypocritical and, I don't know, backwards of any school that's trying to teach kids how to think critically and won't allow them to do something that's part of the national conversation? And that's what a lot of parents think, and I back them up when it's like, if I had a kid that age, I would say, stand up for what you believe in, but you better be able to defend it. Don't just do it because your friends are doing it, do it because you understand why you're doing it. And isn't that what school's for, question mark?
It's just so weird that what that moment has to be like when you're in the principal's office and you're like in trouble,
right?
And someone comes out with a paddle,
right?
And the idea that like, yeah, I understand the impulse to have 2 people around, but like that means that there's someone in this room where a kid's getting beaten, just to watch.
Yeah, who can tell the world his story?
Who volunteered for that?
That is so.
Oh, you're paddling the students. Man, I'll be the witness. I'll be the witness.
The other regulation is it can't be excessive. Again, paddle, and then it can't be done with any malice. You're hitting a kid on the thigh. Yeah, the key said it ended up not hurting. The principal, the quote in his statement, the principal was like, "It's not always like that." And you can't tell the principal was like, "Don't worry, sometimes it hurts more, be thankful," or like, "It's supposed to hurt more. I wish I could do it again, but I can't act with malice."
Was the principal being kind of like, wink, wink, I got you, I'm on your side, tap, tap?
We can't tell, but that was my reading of it. To be fair to the principal, Wiley said in his letter that he respected the adults, they did nothing wrong. And they're put in this awkward situation where the principal has to come out and tell the kids when they're doing the walkout, do you understand the consequence of your actions? And explain that you're going to get beat for this or swatted for this. But I got the sense from Wiley's letter that the principal was like, okay, but the next time it might actually hurt, right?
And even if the principal wasn't that way, it is a great way to defang what might seem like a criticism of him, which is like he just doesn't like his principal. He's like, the principal was acting completely in accordance with what it was. We were all professionals there. Meanwhile, I'm 16. Or however old he is.
He had so much grace in his letter that he wrote towards the school officials, and not to minimize what Wiley and all these other students have done because it's so courageous and brave. But when you look back through history and the way that students have changed the course of history through walkouts and marches and protests, the consequences that students today are facing are different, markedly different from what they faced, when the KKK might have targeted you, when you were marching in your school and trying to, fight for desegregation or integration in the school. So that, again, not to minimize what these students have done, but just to show how powerful these statements can be and how much change they can really affect when you look back through time.
And of course, probably the most famous instance of fighting against segregation was in Arkansas as well.
Yeah. Yep. Well,
a long way.
Some things don't change very much, do they?
Yeah. All right. What else we got?
Okay. A University of Pennsylvania law professor has been punished for her statements about black students. She said originally penned an op-ed which drew some controversy. She went on she Skyped into a talk show to kind of clarify her remarks. Here is what she said.
I don't think I've ever seen a black student graduate in the top quarter of the class, and rarely in the top half. I can think of 1 or 2 students who've scored in the top half in my required first-year course. Well, what are we supposed to do about that? That you're really you're putting in front of this person a real uphill battle. And if they were better matched, it might be a better environment for them. That's the mismatch hypothesis, of course. We're not saying they shouldn't go to college. We're not saying that.
Do you have
some of them should? Some of them shouldn't.
Do you have a racial diversity mandate for law review appointments at Penn?
Yes. Yes.
So you're telling me that students of color who have served on law review are pretty much in the bottom half of their law classes at Penn?
I would have to what I know. I mean, I haven't done a survey. I haven't done a systematic study. I'm talking about who gets the honor. I have I have a class of 89, 95 students every year. So I see a big chunk of students every year. I'm going on that because a lot of this data is, of course, a closely guarded secret, as you can imagine.
Sure.
So what was the fallout of that? According to the Washington Post, Amy Wax, the tenured professor in question, will continue to teach electives in her areas of expertise, but will be removed from teaching first-year curriculum courses, implying she will no longer be teaching required courses for all students to take.
This kind of confuses me because, what she said might suck. But first of all, whatever stats, because I think she provided some stats in the story that they were trying to figure out whether they were correct or not. If she's just providing stats, what's the? Are we shooting the messenger?
No. So that's a great question because I actually in the beginning thought the same thing. When I remember reading the headline yesterday, actually going, well, it totally depends. So it depends on if she's saying, look, I think that African American students are not finishing in the top half of the class, and I think we should find ways to fix that.
Right. Exactly.
And so here is some of the issues, and here's maybe more help we can get, not just necessarily even for African American students, but from students who came from a poor socioeconomic background who have some catching up to do rather to the kids who went to private schools, et cetera, et cetera. So I was really looking forward to reading to see which one it is. But Gina, in her case, it doesn't look like that's the direction she went. So let me explain why. First of all, let's note the irony. She's still going to teach classes in her area of expertise, which is social welfare law and policy. Okay, I'm not sure that now that I've read totally into her background, I'm not sure she cares a lot about that, or if she does, she's got a curious way of showing it. So she said that. And by the way, there's another comment that could start out as an interesting topic, especially in a campus, to have a discussion around. She said all cultures are not equal. I actually agree with that, and we've talked a lot about on this show. But if you mean actual cultures and portions of cultures as opposed to races, right? And now to be fair to her, and we'll see if you think this is fair or not, because I'm just going to quote her. She says that there's problems with cultures of some working class whites. Rap culture of inner city blacks, and anti-assimilation ideas among Hispanic immigrants that are destructive to American democracy. And now, so it seems like she's got an issue with poor people overall, okay? And in fact, she says that we should return to the 1950s posture, this is a quote, 1950s posture of celebrating bourgeois culture.
Yeah.
So, and she said that over and over again. She's like, bourgeois culture is great. Like, okay, but can we give poor folks an opportunity to reach it, right? So that's a different conversation, but she didn't leave it at that. She also talked about how academics, the media, and Hollywood have to, quote, relinquish multicultural grievance polemics. So meaning like, oh, the minorities that are complaining should basically shut up about it. And she went on to say that everyone wants to go to countries ruled by white Europeans, and quote, I don't shrink from the word superior. So when you say you're for supremacy, you can't blame people for saying you're for supremacy. There's a different word for that too, it's called racist. So now, racist is a super loaded word. I wish she was a more nuanced intellectual that could engage in an interesting conversation rather than white people are awesome, don't you want to go to their countries and they're superior to you?
And there are more nuanced intellectuals and academics who have pointed to the racial disparities in law school outcomes. And one of those was a black professor at Yale named Richard Brooks, who called it a real and serious problem, but he also called on educators to be involved in finding the solutions. And I think that's part of what you were saying. You know, when you have a teacher like this who is making these kinds of comments, racial bias in grading comes to mind, and it calls into question her credibility as a professor, whether or not she can fully do that fairly. Also, you know, socioeconomic situations that might put certain minority students at a disadvantage, and we know that the debt balance, the debt, it affects minority students differently than it affects white students. And also there's the issue of social capital and minority students not having role models in their lives who can walk them through some of the challenges of law school and show them what the image of a successful lawyer or someone who works in a legal profession looks like. So I think it's just a way of like oversimplifying, which is what people like her, provocateurs on the far right, love to do. Someone online compared her to an Ann Coulter, which of the academic world, which I think was pretty appropriate.
Yeah, later on in the interview, she does go through like the kinds of situations in schools that she would endorse, and she endorses one thing that gets closer to like, you know, changing outcomes to make people more equal, and it's no excuses schools. Which is like I
wouldn't do well there.
Well, it's no excuses, and it's the kind of schools. And I've just been reading up on this, and I haven't been to any of these schools, so but I did find an op-ed from someone at the education school at the University of Pennsylvania that said there is no excuse for no excuses schools, and it's the kind of schools where like kids have a lanyard around their neck with a card on it, so that teachers who think that those kids are acting poorly can go up and just write a demerit on your card. It says that from the time the kids wake up to the time they go to sleep, their behavior is being judged. And the criticism from this person at the Education Institute, or the Education Department at the University of Pennsylvania, said it immediately treats kids at those schools as less than, as criminals, as someone they're inmates. Yeah. They're inmates from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. And people like Amy Wax would say, well, it gives them a structure. And you just see everywhere she starts talking about it. That structure, she goes, structure because they're black, because they're Latino, because they won't, and she says this explicitly in the editorial that Cenk was talking about, they won't assimilate to American culture and their families are broken. These are assumptions that she makes, and something that the Dean of Students himself even brought up. If we go to graphic number 35, he said black students assigned to her class in their first week at Penn Law may reasonably wonder whether their professor has already come to a conclusion about their presence, performance, and potential for success in law school and thereafter. And if we go to the previous graphic, 34, he said, I just want to clarify something. It is imperative for me as dean to state that these claims themselves, the statistics she seems to be citing, are false. Black students have graduated in the top of the class at Penn Law. And contrary to any suggestion otherwise, black students at Penn Law are extremely successful both inside and outside the classroom, in the job market, and in their careers.
Well, I want to say one other thing that's factual. Again, to Gina's point, if she just stated facts, well, then had an interesting conversation around it, that's fruitful, that's productive, that's interesting, right? But she didn't even get her facts right. So when she said in that little snippet that we saw that there is a diversity requirement for Penn Law Review, the dean came out and said, no, there isn't. She just made that up. No, there's only the people who score at the top make it into the law review. So it's just not true.
She mentions also in that it's an hour-long interview, which is fascinating. You should watch it if you like, you know, masochism. Anyways, she goes into this prevalence of identity politics, and a lot of people have mentioned that in the recent election. Identity politics is like a hot-button issue, but she thinks that identity politics fetishizes resources, and when it comes down to it, the people who are talking about the identity politics she's mentioning, they're just identifying problems. She doesn't want to identify the actual problems and the causes and how to fix them. She just always seems to funnel things back into this like, don't ask what we can do to help you help yourself ethos that just is bastardized in so many ways by white supremacists everywhere.
Do you believe, just to sort of keep this like super accountable, and as Ben has called me before, willfully obtuse, which I appreciate it. I love him to death. Do you believe she's a white supremacist?
Yeah, I mean, by the definition of it, I believe she's a white supremacist. It just
because immigrant. I mean, it's been in the news many times. Immigrants do go to Germany. They do go to Denmark.
Well, listen,
they do go to,
there's academics. Like that's an academic thing, and I know academics, teachers, professors who've been doing it for 50 years, who are like, well, here are the statistics. And some of them just leave them as statistics. The others just pull everything toward this theory they've been working on for 40 years, this book they've been writing for 40 years. And that's the lens through which they've been taught to see everything. And it's at work in the previous story we talked about. Like people in Arkansas pull it toward the lens where they typically see things. And it's a shame in academics, because in academics, you're supposed to be looking at the facts.
Right.
And letting that drive the discussion.
So I want to make a couple points about what Gina said, because it's an interesting point. So she's like, oh, well, people are going to white European countries like immigration, but that's an economic issue. So for example, there's a lot of immigrants that come to Turkey. I use Turkey as an example from time to time because I'm a Turkish American.
What do you
so
know about? Right? Oh, sorry.
and there's immigrants from the Middle East and the immigrants from Central Asia. Do they come because they think Turks are the superior race? They really know what they're doing, right? I'm sure Turks think that, but that's not why they come, because Turkey is slightly better off economically than the countries they came from, and they could make it to Turkey, and they're like, okay, great. And that's why they come. It doesn't have to do with race, etc. And so now, look, you go real back in the history as to why the European countries are better off economically, and so is Japan, for example. It's partly because of the raiding culture. They raided the southern hemisphere, took a lot of the money. Again, not related to race. So did Japan, right? And so did the Mongols. They were known for raiding. And for the moment being, the Mongols were incredibly rich when they took over all those areas, etc. And so that is part of why people immigrate to there. And is she a white supremacist? Look, the terms, like, conservatives make us call them racist from time to time by being so goddamn racist. Like, I don't wanna, those are loaded terms, and white supremacists, I know a lot of people get turned off. They hear that word and they wanna run for the hills. But in her case, she literally said, we're superior. Now you could say, hey, you know what? She didn't mean white people, she just meant rich people. I don't, okay, fine, but I don't know that makes it that much better. In some ways, it might make it worse, because she just has disdain for anyone who isn't already wealthy. And it's just sickening. So when she looks at a white kid from the hollows of West Virginia, and she thinks, yeah, I'm superior, right?
Those terms are tough just because they are so loaded right now. So I don't know that I'm going to go there, but I am going to say that her credibility is absolutely called into question at this point. If you're a black student in her class, how can you trust that she is going to treat you fairly? So I think the university actually handled it pretty well, and I think that they did what they should have done. I don't know that she should be banned from campus for, sharing these very controversial views, because I think that plays into the playbook that these people on the far right want. That's exactly what they want.
Yeah, and beyond that, she's tenured, and tenured is tenured, and we got to stick with that for important reasons. But last thing, to challenge her facts and her view of the world, has anyone ever tracked how heritage? I'm sorry, not heritage, legacy students do in these colleges? Because they're filled to the rim with legacy students. Exactly. Legacy students are, their parents went to that school. So I think I read a study recently, now 40% of Harvard students are legacy students. So that is actually the biggest affirmative action there is. And the reason they do it is for money. If the biggest indicator whether you will donate to a school is if 2 generations of your family have gone to that school. So it's all about financial motivations. I bet I would be really surprised if you tracked legacy students if they didn't way underperform, because they didn't earn their way into that school like the other 60% of Harvard. So, but nobody ever tracks that, because the assumption is rich people are great, poor people have something wrong with their culture.
We gotta take a break.
Yes, we do. Okay, when we come back, really interesting story. There's a bunch of interesting stories. There's the bridge collapse, etc. But I actually love the Katy Perry story. I think that makes for fascinating.
Say that every day. I love the Katy Perry story.
No. Yes, but I do today because it's filled with controversy and interesting issues. All right, we'll be right back.
T-minus 1 minute till landing. TYT broadcast controllers, listen up. Give me a go, no go for landing. Sound?
Audio is hovering at minus 12 decibels. We're go.
Streaming?
We're go.
Camera crew?
We're go.
Mission control?
We're go.
Snacks?
We're good.
Iguana? Sir, we are go for landing. Okay, everybody. I want this to go off without a hitch.
Sir? I've been looking over this joke for the past hour, and with the Bannon firing now weeks old and waning interest—
English, Johnson, English. What are you trying to tell me?
This joke isn't going to land, sir.
Okay, everyone. Forget the old plan. From this moment on, we're improvising a new joke.
So this is where the show started, and this is where it was supposed to end. Now the joke was supposed to land here, but that's not gonna happen, obviously. So we need to come up with a new joke. Maybe here?
The hits are dropping, streams are failing, retweets are stopping.
40 seconds.
All right, team. We gotta find a way to make this fit into a joke about this that will appeal to them.
30 seconds.
The Trump joke's our safest option. Trying to land a Trump joke after this week's events is a suicide mission.
We are officially out of time. We need to act now.
Sir, I think our best course of action is to let Jink try to land a dad joke.
That's the deal?
That's the deal.
All right, everyone, to their stations.
Germany, and some of the creditor nations like Netherlands and Finland.
Cameras, position, social media team. Brace front follows. 10 seconds. As for the rest of us, all any of us can do now is wait and hope.
This is gonna be the worst disaster TYT has ever experienced.
With all due respect, sir, I think this will be the finest hour 2 yet.
Angela Merkel's government seems to have signaled pronounced.
Come on, Jink.
Everyone, it's been a pleasure streaming with you.
Greek Prime Minister immediately picked up the phone to Putin and said, "You Putin any money in?" Okay, anyway.
TYT crew, the joke has landed.
Back on the Young Turks, Cenk, Simone, Gina, and Brett with you guys. Tweets, Stalkington writes in, or no, Stalking Lion writes in, I don't care if you're tenured, you have racist opinions, you should lose your job. As an educator, that woman makes me physically ill. Okay? Riley Grady, on the other hand, says, I'm from rural Montana and had extremely conservative teachers. Luckily for me, they were good at their jobs and made me defend my ideals. So that's lovely to hear. And for, it's not quite an on the other hand from Stalking Lion, but it's a different point of view. For a more perfect America writes in, with a less subtle point, hey lady, what the F are you smoking? Mismatch hypothesis my ass. Oh. So if you don't know, mismatch hypothesis is, we should match the students to the schools where they will do better. In other words, do black kids really have to go to Harvard? Can't they just go to a lower school? Well, they'll do better. I'm being a bit of a dick about that, but relatively. But nobody ever says like mismatch hypothesis for legacy students, right? Like, is that really rich student really going to do well at Dartmouth, or should they go to a community college?
Yeah, it's just keep it the same way. In the interview, she also says like, when they say the word segregation, she's like, I'm not for segregation.
Oh, come on,
do you hear yourself?
Can we
There you got.
Can we also just look at our priorities as a nation? We spend more on our prisons than we do on our public schools. So I think that.
Yeah, but we're just fetishizing resources. That's what she would say.
That's exactly.
But that's because she's a very stable genius. Oh, am I plugging this T-shirt that you could find on shoptyt.com? I hadn't noticed. Okay, best-selling shirt we got. Kofefe is pretty good too. A lot of the shirts are great, but check it out at shoptyt.com. And of course, everybody become a member at tytnetwork.com/join. And if you do, for example, the Bernie Town Hall, all the members get to watch that whenever they want, which is kind of neat. And I forgot to mention, Elizabeth Warren's also at the Town Hall, and so is Michael Moore and Anna Kasparian. I think that's the four horsemen of the progressive left in America.
Yeah, it's amazing. Four Horsemen's a little end of the worldy. It's trying to be like the epicalypse or like, I don't know, the apocalypse. It's
the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic
That's
Four.
much better.
Yes.
Way less deathy.
Okay, all right. What's next?
All right, so a bit of a change of gears here. You may have seen news of the bridge collapse at Florida International University. They were building a bridge. It was 950 tons. They called it an incident bridge. And while they were building it, it collapsed on traffic that was allowed to pass underneath it at the time. There's an ongoing investigation as to what went on. Marco Rubio trying to clarify, saying things like they were supposed to tighten the cables on it, and they ordered someone to tighten it, but before they could be tightened, this happened. But there is an ongoing investigation. One of the companies behind it made a statement in the wake of the event. It's called FIGG, F-I-G-G, Bridge Engineers. And they released a statement to CBS saying, our deepest sympathies are with those affected by this accident. We will fully cooperate with every appropriate authority in reviewing what happened and why. In our 40-year history, nothing like this has ever happened before. Our entire team mourns the loss and injuries associated with this devastating tragedy, and our prayers go out to all involved. It looks like a pretty solid apology. There was that thing in the middle, though, saying that in our 40-year history of this family company, nothing like this has happened before. But news has surfaced of a previous incident, as reported by WTKR through a Virginia paper, saying construction of the South Norfolk Jordan Bridge back in 2012 was put on hold. It was designed by the same firm after a truss used to build the bridge shifted, which sent a 10-foot, 90-ton piece of concrete crashing down to the railroad tracks below in June 2012. 4 workers were injured in the incident. As a result, the firm was fined officially $28,000. It's just weird that you would, it's a family company, it's a small company, and then you wouldn't mention something that happened as recently as 2012.
And also, I thought I read that they put it up in like 6 hours, and that there was plans not even to have this bridge ready till next year. So what's the rush, and what's the payoff for? I mean, it's a footbridge. Go around. Who cares?
Yeah.
Why would they risk people's lives?
It's this new construction method called accelerated bridge construction, and it was developed.
I vote no. On name alone, I vote no.
Right. It was actually developed in part at FIU, which is why I think they saw this as a publicity opportunity.
Oops.
And it was developed with a couple of other universities. But yeah, the whole idea is it goes up in like 6 hours as opposed to obstructing traffic for 24 to, or not even like for 24 weeks or however long it takes to build a bridge.
We had in here when they built the bridge over the 405, it shut down traffic for like days, entire days at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm never defending anything that they do to enhance the 405 in any way, but because they did that, it didn't collapse and people didn't die.
Yeah, so that leads to the most important point, which is like we got to constantly defeat these right-wing mythologies, and so they say, regulation is always bad. Regulation, it slows everything down. You got to deregulate. Well,
it kind of depends, doesn't it? Right? So if there's overregulation, which is entirely possible, then yeah, you should deregulate a little bit. If Wall Street keeps crashing the economy, I'd step up the regulation rather than step it down, as an example. And in bridges, let's keep it up. Let's keep the regulations up, right? Because if bridges fall, then people die, and it's kind of a bad idea. Look, buildings used to collapse all the time back in the day. We didn't know how to build them to be earthquake resistant, for example, when earthquakes hit, right? Or we did know, but there was no regulations enforcing it, so it was cheaper to build a building without those required regulations built in.
And, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Now, it does cost more to build a building in LA now, but guess what? In the middle of an earthquake, you're super psyched that they built it that way.
Right.
Because when a 90-ton slab of concrete falls in your head, it kind of hurts.
Yeah, it's terrible. And MCM, the other company that was involved in the actual construction, said that, or it was reported that they also had 11 violations since 2013 and had been fined $50,000 over that time. That was reported in Time Magazine through stats from OSHA.
Yeah, you know, one last weird point I want to make on this story. So Wolfpack is a organization to get money out of politics. You hear me talk about it all the time. wolf-pack.com/go. It's a donate or volunteer.
Subtle.
That's right. Get money out of politics. Anyway, but I'm super proud of the people in it, and there's a lot of veterans in the group because they think it makes sense. It's orderly. And it's fighting for freedom in a different way. There's a lot of teachers in the group because they find that it helps because they get frustrated with what happens in their school system and they want to know how to fix it. They logically figure out that it's money in politics. But there's also a lot of engineers. And I talked to a couple of engineers in a row a couple of years ago. I remember having these conversations with the volunteers, right? And I was like, what drew you to Wolfpack? He's like, and one of them made a great comment that I quote from time to time on the show. You can't half build a bridge, right? If you're an engineer, you have to get the bridge 100% right. Right, and so they think Wolfpack is logical, and it brings you all the way to an amendment, which actually solves a problem, which is very nice of them to say. But I was reminded of that reading this story. You can't even 99% build a bridge. You know, if you're an engineer, you got to get it 100% right. That's why regulations are important in cases like this.
Until it's done, don't let people drive underneath it.
Yeah.
Ugh, not to mention the bridges in America that we don't know where they are, but they've been rated as structurally unsafe unless infrastructure spending goes to fix them. Okay. Let's move on to Katy Perry.
Yes.
He kissed a girl. Did he like it? Do you know what I mean by those words? From the season of American Idol that no one asked for came a kiss that no one asked for. Katy Perry is one of the judges. She's on American Idol. This is a guy. Let's take a look at this gentleman. His name is Benjamin Glaze. He's 20 years old. He never kissed a girl in his life. Of course, the producers told that to Katy Perry, and she was like, have you ever kissed a girl? And he said, no. So she said, let's remedy that. And she offered what? Her cheek. He went up and kissed her on the cheek, and she was like, oh, that was great. Then she said, can you kiss the other cheek? And as he was going up to kiss the other cheek, what happened?
No.
Last second, turns her face.
Booyah.
Mouth to mouth. It was the kiss heard around the world as evidenced by this next photo. It knocked him on his buns.
That's unbelievable. That's unreal.
In the wake of this, he said, would I have done it if she said, would you kiss me? According to this quote. No, I would have said no. I know a lot of guys would be like, heck yeah, but for me, I was raised in a conservative family and I was uncomfortable. Immediately, I wanted my first kiss to be special. He was sent home, by the way, because he did not perform well. According to him, his heartbeat was going so fast. But then he came back to qualify his statement saying, I do not think I was sexually harassed, because a lot of people came up and said, this is sexual harassment. It seemed from the previous quote that it was. And he said, I don't think I was sexually harassed by Katy Perry, and I'm thankful for the judges' comments and critiques. I was uncomfortable in a sense of how I have never been kissed before and was not expecting it.
Okay, I have enormous mixed feelings about this story.
Love it. Bring it.
I love this story.
Bring
okay.
it.
So, number one, there's something super endearing about the kid. You know, so I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm not a conservative. But he's a conservative kid and he's 19 and he wanted his first kiss to be special. And for all the kids out there, don't sweat it. It's not going to be that special. Just move on, get the kiss, move forward.
Also, it's not going to be with Katy Perry.
It will not be.
And by the way, getting your first kiss from Katy Perry is pretty special. It's pretty special, pretty neat. Yeah. I would have taken it. Anyway, so he's cute. He fell down, and he's like, oh, I want to be in a relationship. And before, I don't agree with him. I don't think you need to be in a relationship. I think you should get going and all that. But I'm to your point, Simone, right? Now, people are saying if you flipped it and Katy Perry was a guy of her age and kissed a 19-year-old girl without permission, people would have flipped out. And I don't know. I want to hear you guys out on that.
This is a pretty big gray area. I mean, I think you're right. If you flip the genders, I would be. I mean, I'm kind of uncomfortable with it right now. I don't know.
So there is a lot logically to sift through, and there's a lot of frameworks that have arisen in recent years about power dynamics and races or genders of traditional power and how that affects how you're supposed to interpret it. And I think it's twofold. So flip it in reverse. There's a lot of things in this that I've covered on various shows where it's like, if you flip the races, and the response is, yeah, but one race has been traditionally in a position of power, and so that equivalency doesn't really work out. Whatever you feel about that, just know that that is a framework of discourse in America that's evolving. However, if you go back to the power dynamic in this situation, it is a host. There is a host there who is also Katy Perry, a judge in a position of extreme power, and she kissed him. I do think if you go to a more specific level, this guy has not had a kiss, he's 20 years old. He is in that position where it's like, yeah, she still has cooties. I didn't know what to do, I didn't like it, and he may have liked it. The dominant thing to pull out of it, in my opinion, is she shouldn't have done it. It seems super markety because the last two things, Grace pointed this out on Pop Trigger when we covered it, they're doing a lot of marketing about how Katy Perry is in love with various people.
Yeah, I think you're
weird
right.
Marketing too.
Well, but as somebody anecdotally who's had one of my first kisses, like my third kiss, had to be in a rehearsal space in front of my mom in a play, and they really wanted me to go for it. So I get that this kid was like super uncomfortable, and just because he's a boy, who cares? It's still sad. But the thing I couldn't stop thinking about was, I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume this wasn't Katy Perry's idea. She has producers in her ear. They're trying to make people watch this show. They're trying to create controversy because nobody gives a crap about this show anymore. And they're like, we're sending this kid in. Here's how it's gonna play out. Do your thing. So at that point, it's like, she could say, I'm Katy Perry, I don't have to do anything. Or she's like, I want to be a team player. All right, let's just get this done. So I always think, who's in her ear and who's putting the pressure on her to do something, whether she wants to do it or not.
She seemed more than team player, though. She seemed pretty into the idea.
Yeah. Well, you guys have swung me a little bit. Look, my inclination is to scream, "Let her go! Let her go! It's all in good fun, and dude, you'll be all right. You'll be all right.
He will be.
Okay, but at the same time, when you take into account what Brett said about. I mean, she's about the judgment. I mean, you want to talk about a power dynamic, and she's incredibly rich and famous, etc. So we can't say that about the Weinsteins of the world, and it's not comparable. Weinstein did horrible things. But still, I mean, that's a power dynamic. This is a power dynamic. And then Gina's point about, and Brett said it too, the producers, these are highly produced TV shows. Then it becomes, doing it for the purpose of manipulation, right? And for the purpose of ratings and all that stuff. And if we said, okay, let's take a 19-year-old virgin girl, and for ratings, let's have an older man just kiss her without permission, and then we'll call that guy Donald Trump, right? If it had happened on Apprentice, we'd be talking about it as a political issue.
Yeah, and
right?
if they wanted to go full Weinstein, they would bring a fern out there with a guitar, and he would violate that.
Well, also, okay, I'm sure this kid is like kind of riding the high of this moment of, being kissed by Katy Perry. And I don't think he's gonna be emotionally scarred by this, but sexual harassment for a lot of people is something that takes a while, maybe even years, to understand that you were made uncomfortable by it, that it was an uncomfortable moment for you. So he says that he doesn't think it's sexual harassment now, and that's fine. I think we should take him at his word.
Yeah.
But how's he gonna feel in like 5 years? How's he gonna feel in 10
probably
years?
realized that he should have kissed people much earlier and was psyched that it happened with Katy Perry.
I don't know. I'm just posing
But now
the question.
you split me to the opposite direction because, and back to where I wanted to go. He said it wasn't sexual harassment. I'm going to take him at his word. Not guilty.
Not guilty.
Do you want to break and come back and talk about
Yeah,
this
we
more?
got it. We got to go. We'll be right back. We'll be right back. back on the Young Turks. I believe Gina has a
Final thought.
wrinkle on this Katy
Okay,
Perry
excuse
story.
me. I'm just going to don my tinfoil hat that I just made for my tinfoil hat crazy person theory corner. Quickly, nobody should be sexually assaulted. They certainly shouldn't do it on national television, and that's a horrible thing. But I now believe that this goes all the way to the top. They told Katy Perry to give him a good show, and they pulled this kid aside and said, look, we're gonna play the virgin thing. I want you to resist, we're gonna make this a big deal. And I am not telling anybody that I'm not saying I don't believe him, but I'm just saying as a theory, all the way to the top.
Okay, so that he was in on it.
Yeah,
that kid's not even a virgin.
Producers, I don't think they let them do anything on their own, but that's possible. All right, I'm taking my hat off.
All right, everybody check out Simone on KTLA 5 in LA, but also on Mike.com anywhere. Adam Carolla show for Gina, and Brett's right here. All right, bye-bye.